Cool beans.
What's going on, everybody? Welcome to episode 17 of the Hoop Venue podcast. My name is Tyler, and as always, I'm joined by my great friend Sean. Today, we've got something a little bit different for you guys, inspired by the boys over at Nerd Sesh. We are going to be ranking our top 10 scorers in the NBA today. And let's just jump right into it. Sean, what are the things you're looking for specifically when you're ranking a scorer?
So one of the things that I love a lot from scorers, from the best scorers, I think, for me at least, how versatile you can be with your scoring in terms of how you can be set up. I think, obviously, self-creation scoring, geez, off to a fantastic start,
Awesome.
is important to me. Something that can factor in, and I'm sure you kind of have this factored at some point as well, is I think for certain players, they kind of get a playmaking boost, which sounds weird, but I think perfect example, not spoiling anything, but a part of what makes Jokic so damn terrifying is the fact that he has all-time playmaking to go along with all-time post-up scoring, which makes him, as from a team perspective, like pretty much a great shot every trip down the floor, which does matter to me a little bit. So that kind of factors. It's kind of a weird. I don't have a great formula for it, but I think those combination of things do play a factor.
It makes sense. So are you saying elite playmakers in your eyes get a boost to their scoring?
It does give them a slight boost.
Because there are some people.
Saying, go ahead.
I was gonna say there are some people out there who would actually do the opposite and say like, "Hey, you're such a good playmaker that I'm gonna deduct some points because that's not sheer scoring." So it's interesting because I agree with you. I think like another example is Prime LeBron. Like when you talk about Prime LeBron, there were certain things you couldn't do because of his passing that just opened up more scoring opportunities for him, and then it made him a more productive scorer.
Yep.
And that's like one of the things when you compare his playoff numbers over the years to Kevin Durant, you'll see like neck and neck. But like the Hooper guys are like, no, Kevin Durant's a way better scorer. He does more like better 3-level scorer, better jump shooter, things like that. But then you look at, well, hang on, you can double Kevin Durant, sit in his driving lanes. You can't do that with LeBron because of the fact that he's such a good passer, and that does bake into scoring effectiveness. I kind of broke my criteria down into 7 major categories, and then for each player, I graded them on a 1 through 10 scale. Now, that's not my concrete ranking. Like, it was more so just to get an idea in my head of, like, okay, how am I feeling about these guys in each major category? Because I'm not going to weigh every category the same. So if I just did a concrete 1 out of 10 score, add them all up, I'd end up with some wonky list. But these are the 7 categories I came up with. Stop me if you want at any point. Number 1 is volume. And that's not just like points per game, points per 75 possessions. That's the ability to just get shots up at volume that are still maintaining efficiency. So what I mean by that is if you can score 25 points per game at 57% true shooting, can you get that up to 30 or 32 while still having 57% true shooting, or are you emptying the clip, chucking, and then that efficiency is going to down? So I think there's like a scale, right? Like efficiency versus volume. And I think then, so with the volume being my first factor, I think there are certain players that kind of get hurt. It's like play finishers for one, because they just don't have that gear where they can like get to their own shot over and over and over again. I'm thinking like a few guys that I was thinking about on the top of my head. I think the obvious one here is Anthony Davis. Like I think if you look at some of Anthony Davis's volume numbers, you're not going to get the 32 point per game season like Giannis, or like the 35 point per game playoff series like Luka. It's just not going to happen because he's not creating as many shots for himself. And then also the other player that I would say gets hurt, or like type of player from the volume thing is like the older guys who can't maybe sustain it over an extended stretch. Like Steph Curry right now is averaging 22 points a game. I don't think he's capable of going out there and shooting as many shots as Jalen Brunson anymore and like sustaining that for 82 games, a 16-game playoff run, things like that. So that's my first factor, volume. Second is efficiency. Obviously, like making the most of your opportunities. I think this is where a lot of self-creators get hurt and then play finishers get that edge back. Like Anthony Davis, most of his shots are assisted, near the rim, short mid-range bunnies. Those are efficient shots, whereas like a high-level mid-range scorer like DeRozan, those are not efficient shots, so they're just much tougher. It's going to lead to less productive scoring in the long run. So I think those two factors trump everything else. Like the best possible thing a scorer can do is create their own shot at volume efficiently. Create the most efficient shot for yourself. That is the best thing you can do as a scorer. Some other factors that I baked into there: ceiling, like the ceiling of your scoring. When things are going good, like maybe you're facing a favorable matchup, maybe your shot's falling. How high are the heights you can reach? Like, can you get to that efficient 35 point per game playoff series, or are you kind of capped out? And then on the inverse, floor. Like when things aren't going your way, maybe you're facing a bad matchup, maybe your shot isn't falling. How high is your floor? I think that matters a lot. I actually think that's like a huge factor that a lot of people don't consider because volatility can be really tough. Versatility goes without saying, not just like 3-level scoring, but you kind of mentioned it, play types too. Like, can you ISO or pick and roll? Can you play off the ball? One that I kind of struggled with, it kind of goes into your playmaking argument. It's the gravity thing. And the way I kind of broke it up was adjustments that your scoring forces the defense to make, and then how you respond to those adjustments. Just to use an example, Giannis forces every team in the playoffs to build a wall. Yet he's still going to go out there and get like 30 points a game. So I think that is a huge indictment on his scoring. Like, how much does your scoring alone influence the opposing team's defensive scheme? And then does that hurt your production? Because there are examples where players will force adjustments and then they can't actually respond to those adjustments. Funny enough, I'm going to use Jokic as an example again. If you remember in Game 7, Minnesota's strategy was to go under every screen. And he shot like 2 for 12 from 3. I don't think you can do that right now because he's shooting like 50%. But that's just an example of like he forced the team to make an adjustment and then didn't counter it like as well as you would like to see from a scorer of his caliber. I think that matters for just players across the board. And finally, the last of my 7 factors to get off this tangent is scalability. Like, on any team, if you're playing with other ball handlers, if you're getting on a more competitive team at like for a contender level, can you sustain your scoring? And I think that's where like that kind of goes along with versatility. Like, can you play off the ball? Can you do all these little things to just get yourself easy buckets? So those are my 7: volume, efficiency, ceiling, floor, versatility, adjustments, and scalability. Do you have any gripes with that?
No, and even though I didn't do a great job of like explaining my criteria, I think a lot of those did come into factor. I didn't know how I wanted to like fully identify and explain the gravity piece. I think you did a really good job with it. And I think for the most part, we're kind of on the same page one way or another. I didn't rank them necessarily 1 through 10 for those categories, but for the most part, I think we are kind of on the same page.
It's most of it is a mental curve anyways. Like, I kind of just use that as a guideline. I was like, I'm going to give these guys a score. And if it's like, if one guy ends up on my ranking like 20 points out of 70 ahead of the other guy, I'm like, hey, maybe I do think he's a better scorer. And like, it can kind of give me a baseline, but that was more so just like a mental exercise to figure things out.
I do want to say one thing before we get going, just to show how extensive this kind of was. How many players did you consider?
Consider like pretty decently. I was gonna say I ended up listing out like 30-something guys, but like
that's what I'm talking
people
about.
That I actually considered handily, it looks like 25. I ended with 25.
Okay.
So how many did you end up with? Like 25, 28?
In terms of guys that I like had to do like a second look at or whatever, it was like 20. Hold on, wait. I don't know why I'm like guesstimating. 20, 24.
Yeah, mine was 25. I'm sure we have like
29.
Couple, yeah, say we probably have a couple differences, but like we ended up with around like same number in that group of guys. One last thing I want to mention real quickly on my criteria, and I think we both agree here. We talked about this off camera. This is very playoff centric. Like, I do think the 82 game season matters, but I'm more focused on, okay, you have 4 playoff rounds. You're going to see a bunch of different defenses that are going to try to adjust to your scoring. Who's going to be the most productive at putting the ball in the basket? So a lot of these guys don't have playoff samples, so it's a lot of speculation and projection. It's like, okay, we think this would translate well, this wouldn't, and we could be completely off base. Like, it could be where we're just missing the mark on some of these guys that don't have playoff samples, and I think that's totally fine. It's just speculation. But a lot of these guys, we do have big playoff samples. Like Jason Tatum in particular has played like 60 playoff games in the last 3 seasons. We have a massive sample of what that guy does in the playoffs. So I think like a few of these guys are pretty easy to gauge in terms of how they translate, but some of them you're going to see us like get into theory, and it's just going to be like, we don't really know what to do. This is kind of how I feel. We'll probably have some differences in that, but yeah, I want to mention.
Last thing.
Go ahead.
Wait, really quick. One last thing. There are 4 very, very notable players that we did not consider at all. That would
exactly where I was going. Yep.
2 of them for sure would have been in the top 10. It kind of would have made this a little bit easier if we did consider them. Kawhi Leonard, no Joel Embiid, no Paulo Banchero, and no Zion. Those are 4 guys that were not in consideration at all.
I was gonna say, I think the Embiid, Kawhi, and Zion ones are kind of obvious to everyone, like why we wouldn't consider them because of the major injuries. The Paulo one, I wanted to make a note. It's the reason I included him on my do not touch list is because based off of his last year of production, I wouldn't have considered him at all for the list. He just wasn't there yet. But based on the first few games of the season, it looked like he took a leap, and he looked like someone who I would consider. But then he got hurt after 5 games. So he's just like waiting on the bench right now. It's like, okay, we'll revisit this conversation when we get an actual sample size of this new Paulo, because I think there's a very real chance he's in this mix.
Yeah.
But yeah, without further ado, I'm just going to rattle off the names that I like considered but didn't consider super heavily. And if you want to like touch on any of these guys, just let me know, because I'm sure one of them is probably actually in your like heavy honorable mentions. So these are the guys that I ended on with like my 13 through 25. I had, not in order, LaMelo Ball, Ja Morant, Cade Cunningham, Anthony Davis, LeBron James, Karl Anthony Towns, Victor Wembanyama, Kyrie Irving, Jaylen Brown, Zach LaVine, De'Aaron Fox, James Harden, and Franz Wagner. Do you have any strong thoughts on any of those names I just mentioned?
Love the shout to Cade.
He was not to cut you off, he was like a last second throw in. I was like watching some Cade clips, and I was like, you know what? He's shooting like 40% on pull-up threes. He's got the mid-range thing going on. He's getting to the rim, getting to the line. I was like, yeah, we'll throw Cade a shout. He's been hooping.
He's been hooping. I like the Josh shout. I love the De'Aaron shout. I wanted to throw him in a little bit more for my heavy honorable mentions, but I didn't. Have no major gripes with any of those guys that you mentioned.
All right,
for the most part.
I was gonna say, did you want to add to that list? Like, did you have any guys in your like 20 range that I didn't name?
What's funny is I actually deleted the other names so I could focus on my major honorable mention guys. I'm trying to think off the top. This is where the playmaking thing comes in. I did give a little consideration to Trey. I know the rim field goal percentage is really, really bad. The 3-point percentage this season has fallen off. So his scoring as a whole kind of has fallen off. But he's kind of the ultra example of he's so good as a playmaker to where like kind of that gravity does contribute to his scoring and kind of vice versa. So Trey does get a mention for me a little bit.
I also want to throw in there, I kind of overlooked him because of the way this season has gone, but if it was based on last season, I want to throw Tyrese Maxey in there as well. Tyrese Maxey's a pretty unreal scorer. So another guy kind of, there were like 2 other guys I maybe a little bit like, or actually 3 guys I'd say that I like. I'm going to say 4 because I totally forgot. Actually, this guy just popped in my head as I was running through it. Lauri Markkanen I didn't even think about at all. Because
I didn't think about Lauri either.
Yeah, so Lauri hasn't had a great season this year because like the Jazz just have this whole weird thing going on. But like the last 2 years of Lauri, hyper efficient play finishing, definitely would have gotten a mention.
Yeah.
Some other guys that I like looked at but didn't seriously consider were Jimmy Butler with his whole you don't know what's gonna happen in the playoffs.
Yeah.
Jaren Jackson Jr. with the leap he's taken, and then
I had Jaren on my list.
Okay, yeah, and then Darius Garland was another one I thought about, where I was like, yeah, he's a really good scorer. He's got the elite pull-up shooting, but ultimately I was like, I don't think Darius Garland's going to make a serious run, so I didn't consider him. But yeah, that's my like extended honorable mentions list. Let's get to the heavy hitters. Who are your, or start with one. We'll start with one at a time. Who was your first guy off?
My very first guy off, so my number 11 was Steph.
Okay, so give me the why is he not in the top 10? Why is he where he's at? Give me the spiel.
So with Steph, I think obviously the biggest thing that hurts Steph at this point is kind of to your initial point, going back to your own criteria, is volume. Like, can Steph, for an 82 game stretch, be a guy that like gets shots up efficiently, right? Because I think in 2024, on a random Tuesday night, if you said, Steph, we need you to shoot 25 shots and be efficient and lead us to a win, I don't know if Steph can do that. Yeah. Or even like in a playoff setting, I'm not all the way sure if for 7 games, if you went to Steph and said, hey, we need you to efficiently shoot 25 shots in order for us to win this series. I don't know if Steph can do that for a series, an entire series, to sustain the level of efficiency that it would take to be a great scorer. Again, another playmaking / gravity argument, because Steph is such a elite shooter, obviously, and one of the best pick and roll handlers of all time, to where the shot and the playmaking and how teams are going to overreact to his ability to score sets up everybody else to where, yeah, the volume isn't going to be always there. But, I mean, even if you go to that Minnesota game, for example, in the fourth quarter, it was, okay, we're just going to give the ball to Steph. We're going to go spread pick and roll every time down. Mm-hmm. And, oh, you want to put 2 on the ball? Well, guess what? Now it's 4 on 3. And Golden State is, over the past decade, probably the best team in the entire league at attacking with the numbers advantage. And it's because of Steph. So I do still give Steph that. It's really a volume thing for me with Steph. But I definitely had to consider him pretty heavily. And it felt weird kind of leaving him off the list.
I think, it's a totally valid criticism of Steph. I think on the volume point, that was also what turned me away from him more than any other player. I think we're looking at a guy, like I mentioned earlier, 22 points per game this season. Mm-hmm. You look at his prime years, we're talking about a guy up to 30, 31 points per game, consistently over 27, 28 points on one of the best teams ever. Now he's on a team starved of offensive talent. They need the volume, and he's like 22, 23 points. But I do think there are a few things really, really working for Steph in a way that many other players can't replicate. I talked about my 1 through 10 grades on each category. I only gave 1 10 out of 10 score for each category. So, like, the player that I believe heads that category, to me, is like a 10 out of 10. I gave a 10 out of 10 to Steph for scalability. I think the off-ball game, the way his scoring spaces the floor, like, you could put him in any system next to any collection of players, you're going to get just really productive offensive play, scoring in particular for the sake of this segment. And I would even argue that the Warriors aren't at all an ideal situation for him right now. Like, very little rim pressure, very little roll threats. Teams have kind of just figured out the motion at this point in a way that didn't happen in years prior. Mm-hmm. And like you said, when the game boiled down in Minnesota, it was spread pick and roll Steph Curry. And I think that he still has that secret weapon that he can just always pull out of his ass and just like give you really, really productive scoring. Mm-hmm. So for that reason also, I gave him a really, really high grade for ceiling. I think there are very few players on the planet who, when the shots are falling, when they're in a favorable matchup, can match the heights that Steph can match. Like, you can get an efficient 35-40 in back-to-back nights from this guy, and it's like it's nothing. It's just like one flurry, and that's the game. Mm-hmm. I think that matters a lot. And then also the adjustments point. I gave him a really high grade for adjustments. Even to this day, teams have not figured out how to guard Steph Curry. Like, you'll see all types of different strategies. You'll see lots of switching. You'll see lots of ball denial. You'll see lots of hedging and trapping, and you'll see teams try everything under the sun. But Steph Curry still finds a way, because not only is he the best off-ball mover ever, he's one of the best ball handlers ever. And when you can just kind of counter whatever the defense throws your way, and they're going to throw everything your way, I do think it matters that he always has something he can go to on or off the ball. So I do think Steph grades out really, really well in a lot of categories, but I also said the most important thing a scorer can do is create their own shot efficiently at volume. And Steph's regular season production over these last couple of years has not held up that mantle. Like, right now, he's averaging 22 points per game on true shooting percentage, 4% ahead of league average, 22 on +4. That's like perfectly normal all-star scoring. Like, that's not anything to write home about. It's just like, compare that to unanimous MVP, Steph, 30 on plus 13. Like, what are we doing? Like 30 on plus, and then the no fans year, I think it was 32 plus 10. Like,
Yeah.
what are we doing?
Yeah.
So Steph like has very clearly regressed in terms of regular season production. And even another thing I gathered for all these players was what predictive estimated plus minus actually has their scoring at, because I think that does a good job of like weeding out shooting luck and like small sample sizes for the season. So EPM has him at 25 points per 75 on plus 5% efficiency. So still, it's a little bit better than what he's actually producing, but it's still not something crazy. It's just kind of like normal all-star, maybe all-NBA type of scoring. What makes it tough is we haven't seen him in the playoffs since the Lakers series in 2023. And I don't know what to make of that, because the Kings series, absolutely remarkable. 50-point game 7, looked inhuman. Lakers series kind of slows down, is bothered by the physicality and all of the versatility with their coverages and things like that. And then I would even argue he's regressed quite a bit since 2023 as an athlete and maybe even as a shooter. So I didn't really know what to do with Steph. I think he might have actually had the biggest range of any player on my list. But I ultimately did have him in my top 10. I'm not going to tell you where, because we'll get to it. I did have him in my list, but I'm not mad at you sliding him off.
Yeah.
Let's get to your next honorable mention, though. Who else you got?
My next honorable mention is Anthony Edwards.
Totally fair.
I had Ant off my list. And really with Ant, I think it's an efficiency thing with Ant. And I don't see enough playoff counters from Ant. And I think you can maybe even call me a hypocrite with who I have at 10, and that'll be completely justified. But we've seen it in a playoff setting with Ant. Now, I think Ant arguably has one of the higher ceilings, if we're kind of going back to your criteria. If perfect matchup, perfect situation, like Ant Phoenix series. No, literally, Phoenix series. Like, what Anthony Edwards did in that Phoenix series, we were ready to crown him as a top 5 player because of that Phoenix series. By we, I mean national media. But he's also a guy for using the gravity point. I think the gravity actively hurts him, where for a lot of these other guys, I think the gravity kind of boosts them up a little bit. I think the gravity actively hurts Anthony Edwards a little bit. I'm not sure how versatile he is from a play type standpoint, too, in terms of like playing him next to another, let's say, another superstar or another ball dominant player in general. I think that hurts him a little bit, but again, ceiling is there. And I mean, in terms of ways to like create his own bucket, I mean, easily has like top 3 best first step in the league, which is obviously something that he leverages to his advantage as much as possible. So I do have Ant off. Ever so slightly. I think if you had, me personally, 1 through 9, I feel really comfortable with. So if you had Ant at 10, I would understand it. And that's kind of how I view my list, Tyler. Like any 1 through 9, I feel really comfortable with. 10 through like 13 is completely up for debate. I wouldn't care. So yeah, I have Ant at 12.
I think you raise really fair points. I would say I agree that he probably has less playoff counters than a lot of these other guys in terms of like, look at the Mavs series. I account for players who force adjustments. He forced the Mavs to pack the paint. But then once the paint was packed, what could he do?
Yeah.
That's kind of what made it tough.
Can I make a counter argument to that really quickly? Because I could very easily see this happening. I think a counter argument to that would be, well, like, what if he was on a team that, the situation is a little bit more advantageous for him? Like, exactly, right? Like, put him in Boston. And
it's fair.
It is fair. It is fair. I'm going to save it for later. It is definitely a fair argument. And somebody even made a good point about, like, why is he shooting so many threes? It's because the paint is freaking packed every single time with Randall and Gobert, even Jaden a little bit, too.
One of the worst shooting front courts in the league.
Yeah.
And I think that is fair. I do think Ant's in probably a worse scoring situation than maybe any other guy that I considered for the list. So I do think that's fair.
Yeah.
And getting back to my point about, like, not having playoff counters, what he does have is a playoff superpower. Yeah. Like you mentioned it, the first step. There isn't a team in the league, a defender in the league who can stand in front of him. And that matters a lot because when you talk about like I said, the most valuable thing a scorer can do is create shots efficiently. There isn't a more efficient shot than a shot at the rim.
Imagine him in Boston. That's scary.
There isn't a more yeah. Like I'm thinking about him with like proper spacing. Nobody can stay in front of him, and he's like a really good vertical athlete. I wouldn't say he's like an elite finisher around the rim, but he's got counters. He's got strides he can go to, and like decent touch. I would like to see him add a floater. Like Ant with a floater would be disgusting.
Yeah.
But like I do see both sides of this argument. I think the efficiency point is really important because we have like multiple years now of regular seasons where Ant just doesn't look like a top scorer from a production standpoint. This season, 25.6 points per game. So you got some volume. But he's only 1 percentage point ahead of league average true shooting, and that's while shooting 42% from 3 on like 11 attempts a game.
Yeah.
So he's not getting to the line nearly as much. He's not getting to the rim nearly as much. I don't know how much of that has to do with situation or just tendencies. He's shooting more threes. Something I don't know what to do with is the fact that he just becomes an S-tier mid-range scorer in the playoffs, but it's still such a small sample that I don't know what to do with that because in the regular season, he's not a very good mid-range scorer. One thing I will say though, 3-year playoff sample now, 28 points per game on plus 3% efficiency. So he's starting to build that track record of like, yeah, you can throw this guy different looks, but he's going to have some counters. And I think it all stems from that first step, not just that, but also the fact that he's really built. Like he's a strong first step guy. So like, even if you do cut him off, pack the paint, he's going to bump guys off. He's going to get to his spots. He's going to create good shots for himself. Like you mentioned, that's one thing he can do in a ton of different ways. I actually think my biggest disagreement with you would be on the off-ball point because I do think it's fair. It's tough to speculate because we have not seen it. And the best ball handler Ant has played with in his career is Mike Conley, maybe D'Angelo Russell for a year.
Yeah.
Like Ant has not played off of another ball handler, but I will say, bar none, the guy's an elite catch and shoot 3-point shooter.
Sure,
like just
that's fair. Yeah.
ridiculously good catch and shoot 3-point shooter. And I think when you pair that with the first step, you just have a guy who would just be a lethal weapon off the catch, like out of the slot, like stampeding or just coming off of curl screens, things like that. So I do think in the right ecosystem, we'd see a different type of Ant. Like instead of all of this packed paint, spread, pick and roll, I'm hunting for the pull-up 3. Like imagine 5-out Boston. I'm going to create the advantage, relocate, and then play off of the kick-out pass. Like I think that just sounds disgusting.
Yeah.
So Ant's another guy I actually did have in my top 10. So we're just 2 for 2 on just complete disagreement. No, I'm just playing. We're in the same ballpark. Though. Like we're on
like
the
I said,
same line of thinking.
You could very easily talk me into having both of these guys in the top 10. And to some extent, I kind of feel bad leaving Steph and off my top 10.
100%.
Who are your top 2 honorable mentions?
My top 2 honorable mentions. I've only got 2 of them, so these are the 2. We'll go one at a time. I'm going to start with one that, dude, it hurt me to leave him off. Damian Lillard. It hurt.
Okay.
It hurt. It hurt my soul to leave this guy off. I think the pull-up shooting is just such a game breaker, right? Like, there's nothing defenses can do about it. He grades out super well for me in adjustments because you just have to do something imminent about a guy who can pull up from 30 feet and make 37% of them. It's stupid.
Yeah.
It's stupid. And then he pairs that. I would say he looks better athletically than he did last year. Like the burst is coming back.
Yeah,
he's got the change of direction. He gets to the rim well, which like creates a nice balance. It's like, okay, pull up 3 or layup. And then he's also going to get to the line a lot and make 90% of those. So Dame, I think, has one of the highest ceilings of any scorer in the league. Like, we saw it in the Pacer series. Even after a down year, he just goes into the Pacer series and just blitzes them with pull-up threes. And you just can't do anything about it. And this year, again, getting back to that efficiency, some regular season numbers for you. 26 points per game right now on plus 5% efficiency.
Yep.
That's really nice.
Yeah.
That's really nice. Really, really tough thing for me with Dame, though, is the floor. I think Dame is the type of guy that adjustments can be made. And I'm going to talk about one thing in particular that has always rubbed me wrong about Dame. I've been super high on Dame his whole career. Like, I'm such a Dame fanatic. But there's one thing I can't overlook whenever I watch him. And it's the fact that he really, really struggles changing pace. Like, playing at different speeds.
Yeah.
I think most of his scoring starts with like that super high ball screen, right? And he's just going pull up three or drive. I'm going to look at what the big's doing. I'm going to look at how my point of attack defender navigates the screen, and I'm going to pull up three or I'm going to turn the corner and drive. There's none of that like patient, put a defender in jail, carve out the mid-range, play cat and mouse with the big, and basically a non-existent mid-range game unless it's like a quick pull-up or a floater. And I think that's what's tough for me because a lot of these playoff teams, I think, going back, like I would say he's a different player now, but going back to like the 2018 series against the Pelicans, Drew Holiday is just going to stay glued to this guy, chase him off the line, and feed him into Anthony Davis drop. And it's like, what can Dame do from there? It's tough. And obviously not every team's going to have Drew Holiday and Anthony Davis. It's just like the idea, the makings of like a player who can really struggle to get to what he does best are there. He doesn't have the size or athleticism to like force his way into his spots like an Anthony Edwards can, I would say. So yeah, I think that's my one gripe with Dame is I think his lack of pace, specifically in pick and roll, leaves him more susceptible to specific coverages that can take him out of his comfort zone. And then his floor to me is a lot lower than some of these other guys. But like the ceiling, the versatility, the way he forces adjustments, checks all those boxes. The production's there. Maybe after a playoff run from the Bucks, I'll feel differently. But like we've seen one playoff series since 2021. So it's tough. And it was against a very bad defense.
Yeah.
So yeah, I want to give credit to him though. In that series against the Pacers, 31 points per game, plus 5% efficiency, hooping, balling. I see the vision with Dame. I could see him as high as like top 8 on my list. Ultimately, just left him off and it hurt.
Okay. Who's your second guy?
Donovan Mitchell. Another one that kind of hurt.
Okay.
And I actually think the Donovan Mitchell argument to me is really similar to Dame. I think it's kind of the same thing with like, you have this hyper volume pull up three guy who's also looking to drive, but sometimes lacks pace, isn't going to carve out mid-range shots, isn't going to like play cat and mouse with the big in the same way. I will say he's better at that than Dame.
Considerably better than that.
Considerably better. Like specifically the Boston and Orlando series last year, like he was really hunting out that mid-range and it was working.
Yeah.
But a lot of his mid-range buckets to me come in isolation. Like it's like I'm gonna set up on the wing, I'm gonna get the defender on his back heel, and I'm gonna step back into a mid-range. That's a little bit different to me than like in between, like operating in those tight spaces and like getting to the baseline. You know what I mean? It's just a different approach, and I think Mitchell lacks that a little bit. I will say Mitchell just otherworldly slasher. Like the change of direction looks like a running back. Looks like a running.
If we're going a different direction here. If I said like from a ball dominant guard, I'm considering Ant kind of as like a 2 guard here. Ant, Donovan Mitchell, John Morant, like best first step of any like primary ball handler.
That feels right. Zion. I'd throw Zion in there too.
Yeah.
Zion. Yeah, that feels fair. And I would say Donovan Mitchell, basically, I've always said he's the closest thing we have in the NBA to a running back. Like the way he jukes defenders, the lower body strength, the guy's a quadzilla.
Yeah.
Like the 6'10 wingspan to stride into any gap. Like Donovan Mitchell has that down. The driving, the slashing, the pull-up three, I think is super streaky, and that's kind of what turns me away from him because I think we've seen a lot of different instances in the playoffs where the pull-up three goes dry, and then it's like, is the efficiency really going to keep up? Because I don't think he's an elite foul drawer. Like, I don't think he gets to the line enough to where it's like he can survive a really weak shooting series and like some other guys. I would say, his approach to me feels similar to Dame, but they both have their strengths over each other. Like, I would say Donovan Mitchell's the better driver. I would say he's the better in-between game. I would say Dame's better at drawing fouls, initiating contact. I'd say Dame's the better pull-up three-point shooter.
Yep.
I'd say Dame's probably slightly better off-ball, but neither are really like to write home about off-ball. But yeah, to me, it's a pretty similar argument. Donovan Mitchell this season has actually kind of had a down year. He's only 23 points per game on plus 1% efficiency, but I didn't really account for that at all because it's like Cavs have the most efficient offense ever. Evan Mobley's taking a leap. Donovan Mitchell's just chilling right now. But in the playoffs over the last 3 years, 27 points per game. So to your point, shot creation, first step, volume is there. But over the last 3 playoffs, -2% efficiency. So relative to his opponent's defenses, he's shooting 2% worse true shooting than they allow. And I actually think that's just I actually think that's like right on the nail of like pull up three comes and goes. You get series where it's like, oh my God, like the freaking when he was in Utah. When he couldn't miss a pull-up three, and it was like we were watching the best player of all time. And it's like the ceiling is so high.
Yeah.
But then we had a series like the Knicks series, where granted, spacing wasn't great at all. He was forced into a really tough spot. But then he kind of starts to chuck. The shot selection can get questionable. So yeah, Donovan Mitchell to me, again, I see the vision. There's just a couple things that kind of turn me away from having him like locked into a top 10 spot like some of these other guys.
All right. Fair. Well, I think it's time to get to the top 10, unless you have any other guys you want to really, really highlight.
No, did you have anyone else, or are we ready to get into this top 10?
I think we're ready to get into the top 10 because based off like some of the guys you have named, I think one of my other honorable mention guys are going to be in your list, so we'll talk about it anyway.
Oh, okay, interesting. So my number 10 is Anthony Edwards. We already talked about him. We don't got to do it again. We kind of talked about like you could see him 10th. Anthony Edwards for me, really tough battle with Mitchell and Lillard. Like those three, I was like, Edwards, Mitchell, Lillard. What do I do? What do I do? I ultimately landed on Anthony Edwards at 10. Who was your number 10?
All right. I want to get this very, very clear. This is not recency bias. And this is completely there is no real playoff sample either. I'm sorry, go ahead.
Can I guess who it's going to be?
Yeah.
Is it Zach LaVine?
It's not Zach LaVine.
Okay. I was going to say, because I know you've been on the Zach LaVine train recently. Who is it?
All right. So my number 10 guy, hold on, let me go back to his profile here. My number 10 guy is Wemby. Wemby 10.
Ooh, like it.
That is the crazy hot take I had. And really what it comes down to of Wemby, if we're kind of, I like your scale, so I'm kind of base it a little bit off of that. Number one, I think we account for ceiling. Offense, it's stupid. Now, granted, in the same token, you could argue out of any of the, let's say there's like 15 real guys that we're considering here, he arguably has one of the lowest floors currently out of any of those guys, especially in a playoff setting. You can definitely make that argument. But one, he's automatically, like before a hypothetical series even happens, he is automatically going to make you make an adjustment. Like,
yes,
Stan Van Gundy, JJ Redick. I love this story. JJ Redick was telling a story about how Stan Van Gundy, when they were in Orlando, before it would have been, what year did they face Boston in the conference finals? So it would have been 2010, I think. Before that series, JJ said like Stan Van Gundy is actively making adjustments before the series happens, which on one hand I think could be kind of smart, but on the other hand, like, let's get the series started first. Like, go with your gameplay for that series and then make an adjustment. Wemby's the kind of guy that you're actively going to kind of over prepare for heading into a playoff series. I think we are. I don't know if we're there quite yet, but I think we are legitimately getting to a point where a Wemby touch on offense is almost going to lead to a great shot every single time. I think we're almost at that point. And I really, if you look at like his post up points per possession, you know, the Spurs was going in at 1.22 points per possession on every time Wemby has a post touch, whether it's him scoring out of it, whether it's him passing out. I think he's grown as a passer out of the post.
He's great.
I think the counters are going to continue to develop. And I think another reason why I'm kind of shooting my shot and being a little early on this is I expect the turnovers to kind of drop down. So if you look at only Wemby's scoring possessions out of post-ups, he has a turnover percentage of 21.5% on post-ups this season, which out of any player in the league that has had at least 15 post-ups scoring possessions this season, Wemby has the eighth worst turnover percentage. Out of any is like 70 guys, 63 guys. Out of 63 guys, he has the 8th worst turnover percentage for any guy that has 15 plus post-up scoring possessions. And he's still a pretty daggone good method of offense. And he's probably, if you don't account Jokic, because I don't think Jokic will really he's kind of a hybrid of play initiator and play finisher. Out of any true play finisher, Wemby's probably the best play finisher. I mean, you have AD.
It's him and AD.
It's him and AD, right?
Yeah.
I think in terms of the scalability, in terms of like putting him with different offensive weapons, I think he fits in perfectly fine. I guess really the only thing that is unclear with Wemby is playoff counters. What does it look like when you have a team like dialed in on you? But I'm definitely kind of projecting with Wemby. But I think he's been so good. The shooting is just unreal at times too. Like there's games he had, I think it was Phoenix where he didn't shoot the ball well. So there's going to be nights where the shot can cause his offensive production to be pretty volatile. But overall in the season, he's a plus 3, I think, efficiency.
Yep. 25 points per game plus 3% efficiency.
Plus 3% efficiency. 25 points per game. Shooting 35% from three. He's an unreal finisher around the basket. Yep. Wemby's my number 10. I'm curious to see what your reaction is.
I 100% see the vision. Like, I genuinely was considering him too, for if I should just kind of just go with it and just send it. I see it. The ceiling is absurd. Like, when the guy's shooting 43% from three or whatever he's been doing over his last 10 games, on like 10 attempts, it's like, what can you do? Because then you over-index on that, and now you got a 7'4" alien attacking the rim and shooting 80% at the rim, or he somehow transformed into a 90% free throw shooter. Like, what the heck is that? I see it. I have a few question marks that are mostly playoff related. I do worry a bit more about the turnover thing than you do, because I think it's been a consistent theme from day one, where it's like when you give this guy like more than 60 or 70 touches, he's going to have like 4 or 5 turnovers. It's like a guarantee. And I think that there are 2 problems with it. I think one is the physicality aspect. Like, teams don't have much trouble pushing him out.
Yeah.
And I think he's more prone to turn the ball over when he's catching it like 20 feet out. And then the other thing is just the natural drawbacks of what happened when you have an 8-foot wingspan and you're handling the ball on the perimeter. It's like the Kevin Durant thing. Kevin Durant's always been a pretty high turnover creator, and it's just because he's so lengthy, like, people are just going to get under that and strip the ball every now and then. And I do think Wemby kind of struggles with that. The big difference is he can gather from the 3-point line and still get to a layup because he's built like a Slender Man. So, yeah, I don't know what to make of Wemby yet. And some of these, I guess I'm just a little bit more hesitant on the playoff thing.
Yeah.
And I think it's because we've seen some teams go with a recipe that I think everyone would go with in the playoffs, and I don't know what it would look like. And that's the fact that Dallas did it, OKC did it. They put these like sturdy 6'6" wings on Wemby, push him out, and then switch every action involving him. And they basically make Wemby shoot everything over the top of the defense from 20 plus feet out. Mm-hmm. And to me, it's just waiting on getting a bigger sample size of what Wemby truly is as a shooter. Because if he is this 42% three-point shooter, I have no doubt that he can go into the playoffs and just shoot over everyone. It does not matter. But then in the same token, if this is just a hot streak and he comes back down to earth and he's really like a 34% shooter, that's where I'm like, I don't know yet. I don't know what to really make of it because it's still only been 25, 30 games. Mm-hmm. So I do think, like you said, the floor is a little bit lower to me. I think the adjustments aspect, I 100% agree. He's going to force more adjustments than maybe anyone in the league. But my question is, how does he respond to those adjustments, and can he still give you an efficient 25, 26 points per game?
Totally
That's
valid.
what's tough for me.
Totally valid.
So yeah, I'm kind of on the fence about it. Like, I could have him in my group of like strong honorable mentions. I could have him on my list. I could kind of just discount him and kind of wait like I am with like Paolo. Mm-hmm. But yeah, I see why you went with him in the top 10. It makes total sense, specifically the play finishing thing, because I don't even think we've gotten close to what his ceiling as an efficiency guy is. Because when he's playing off, like, if he was playing off of a guy like, shout out Chris Paul, but if he was playing off of a legit like lead ball handler who could pressure the defense as a high level scorer in their own right, like if like some of these other guys we've mentioned, like Donovan Mitchell, Damian Lillard, like if one of those guys was playing with Wemby, we'd see a completely different animal as a play finisher. It's just true. And so yeah, I think I think Wemby's a tough one, but I see why you'd have him top 10. I don't have any gripes with it.
All right. Number 9.
My number 9 was Steph Curry. We already talked about it. Steph Curry to me, I have my drawbacks, but I still think the ceiling, the scalability, the versatility, the way he forces adjustments, and then like the last time we did see him in a playoff environment, he looked really, really good, really, really like, I don't know. It's just tough for me, but I'm not ready to write off Steph yet. So for me so far, I have 10 Anthony Edwards and 9 Steph Curry.
All right, 9 for me is another guy that we've already talked about. Is Damian Lillard.
Yeah.
I mean, again, ceiling is absurd. Has the one of the more elite superpowers, and that is just you have to guard him from literally half court. And I think the efficiency, specifically this season, with the burst kind of coming back, has been unreal from Dame this season. And it's kind of tough evaluating Dame at times. And we've even had this discussion on the pod. Like, what if Dame was like a number one option again? Because he's technically doing number one option like production and efficiency. Now, there's question marks about how good that team would be. But in terms of can Dame be a number one scoring option, I think the answer is a resounding yes. And I think everything you point out, the lack of in-between game at times, and just pace, because especially like, even if you go back to the playoffs or his recent playoff series, like you brought up the Indiana series where he was really, really good, albeit bad defense. But it was kind of, look, I'm just going to, shoot the lights up from 3 and get to the rim. And outside of, I mean, he took 9.5 free throw attempts, which is, I'm not saying he's a foul baiter, but he is.
It's a good thing, though. It's a good thing,
though. But, okay, free throws, rim attempts, and threes. He took 4 mid-range attempts per game and shot 25% from the mid-range in the Indiana series. So, I mean, you go back to his last playoff series at Portland, which is the Denver series where he was just stupid.
Yeah.
But 3 attempts from mid-range, 20% from the mid-range. So he's a fairly consistent, underwhelming mid-range scorer in the playoffs, which does bring down some of his I'm not gonna say brings down, I'm trying to find the right word, but it does, knock him down just a little bit, where if he was this, pretty reliable mid-range scorer in a playoff setting, then it's okay, what do you do with Dame in a playoff setting? So yeah, I do have Dame number 9. I had to keep him in the top 10.
Makes sense. I actually was really going back and forth on like the Steph versus Dame thing, because I think they have a similar archetype of player. They've always kind of been compared to each other. My question for you is Dame's current production, right? You said, like, imagine if he was a number 1. What if Steph was playing off of Giannis? What does that look like? Because, like, then I'm like, Steph could maybe get back to that super hyper efficiency, and then it's like, are we even having this debate? That's what made it tough for me, because I ended up with Dame 12th, Steph 9th. But it's like a super, super close 9 and 12. I was like, I don't know what to do with these guys. That's kind of where my head was at, though. I just wanted to throw that out there. Like, I was like, Steph is asked to do a lot more than Dame is right now, but Dame was asked to do just as much in 2023 and had just this otherworldly scoring season, so it's tough.
Yeah. I think the what you could give Steph some credit for is, again, kind of and for some reason the word that's used is escaping me. I think the pairing of Steph and Giannis would be astronomically better than Dame and Giannis. So that's actually an argument for Steph because of his gravity from a playmaking standpoint, and how he is the greatest shooter of all time. And his gravity is just a little bit different because of how he moves off the ball compared to Dame. So I do think Steph and Giannis's. I think Steph's compatibility, I guess, with other stars, specifically like wings and guys like Giannis, I think is a little bit better than maybe it currently is with Dame. And Giannis kind of contributes to that as well. But that is a point I think you could positively attribute to Steph.
Fair. So my 10 and 9 was Edwards, Curry. Yours was Wembanyama, Lillard.
Yes.
Who's your number 8?
All right, my number eight is Donovan Mitchell. Another guy that we've already talked about. I get some of your concerns, but they're not as concerning to me, I guess. Like the pull up 3-point shot is definitely volatile, and when it's on, like he's
when it's on, he's like top 5 scorer on the planet.
He's top 5 scorer on the planet. I think he's a good playmaker, has good gravity, but it's not otherworldly that kind of like puts him above some of these other guys I have on ahead of him. But unreal first step, unreal slasher. I think his pace is considerably better than like a Dame, for an example, like we've already talked about. I think Donovan Mitchell, honestly, as a scorer is kind of underrated at times as a scorer.
Fair.
And this season, again, you also brought this point up, is a down year for Donovan Mitchell from an efficiency standpoint, from a volume standpoint. But the Cleveland Cavaliers are the best freaking team in the league. They're the best offense in the league. Evan Mobley took a leap forward. Darius Garland took kind of returned to all-star status. And
Ty
Jerome, like they have 13 real dudes on the roster. So, I mean, okay, Donovan Mitchell, the free throw volume's dropped, the rim field goal attempts have dropped. I'm giving him benefit of the doubt that, okay, come playoff time where some of these other, role players and their production kind of dies off, the Donovan Mitchell's just going to be able to ramp it back up and get back to that, top status that I kind of have a little bit.
I want to make a point real quick on that. I actually think, so if you look at just numbers and you look at Donovan Mitchell's playoff numbers, I would say bubble, straight up best performance he's ever had. 2021, second best performance he's ever had. Just from a number standpoint, the guy was shooting 45% from 3, just absurd. But I would say if you just watch the games from a process standpoint, what he was doing to that Boston and Orlando defense in back-to-back playoff series, getting whatever he wanted, whenever he wanted, just rim attempts on demand, pull-up threes on demand. I agree with your point.
Can I add on one more point to that really quickly?
Go ahead.
If you want to talk about fully fledged out shot profiles, Donovan Mitchell's shot diet last playoff run is got to be one of the better ones you can have from an on-ball dominant guard. 7 rim attempts per game, 62% at the rim. 7 mid-range attempts per game, 47% in the mid-range, and then 8 threes a game, 35% from 3. That's got to be one of the better shot profiles you can have from a ball-dominant offensive player.
Dude, and this is why I hate, I just had to have him 11th, really? I really had to have him 11th? I'm looking back at my list, and I'm okay, maybe I should have moved him up. But then I'm looking at the guys I have ahead of him, and it's I don't know what to do, man. There's just too many good players in the league right now.
Yeah.
One thing I will say, just so I can get the Cavs fans back on my good side, because I got a special place in my heart for Cleveland. I would say I give more credit to Donovan Mitchell for his playmaking than the scoring. In terms of just how people view him in overall media spaces, I think Donovan Mitchell is one of the best playmakers on the planet. I think the way he gets to the rim, the versatile different types of passes he's capable of making, the way his pull-up threat stretches defenses.
Yeah.
I think Mitchell deserves so much more credit for his playmaking than he gets. And then maybe that's baking into my opinion on his scoring, and maybe I'm not giving him enough credit as a scorer because I give him so much credit for the playmaking. I really don't know what's going on in my head. But that's just kind of where I'm at. I see what you're saying with Mitchell, and I think if he comes back this year and does the exact same thing in the playoffs that he did last year, I'd probably be forced to move him up. Because then it's okay, this is just a different Donovan Mitchell. Like you said, 7 mid-range attempts per game. That was not the case a few years ago, I don't think. At least unless I don't know what I'm talking about. But yeah, I think Donovan Mitchell, I think if he does that again, or even just replicates the type of shot diet, not necessarily the percentages, but just gets to the same spots against such a great defense again, I probably will have to move him up.
Your number 8.
My number 8, who I'm assuming you're gonna have maybe even top 5 or 6, is Jalen Brunson.
Okay.
Jalen Brunson's my number 8. Really, really tough guy for me to evaluate. I think super sneaky matchup nightmare, first of all. He's got that ridiculously low center of gravity, but then he's super strong and shifty. And it's you can't really find a good matchup for this guy. I would say the ideal build for a Jalen Brunson defender is Dyson Daniels. 6'6", 6'7", lengthy, agile, strong enough to absorb bumps. But there's only like 3 of those guys in the league. Dyson Daniels, Herb Jones, Jaden McDaniels are like the 3 I would kind of come up with that can kind of smother Brunson with their length. But to Brunson's credit, he can get Jaden McDaniels in foul trouble immediately.
Pretty easily, yeah.
Pretty easily. Not just because of the way he plays through contact, but like Jalen Brunson has these super funky and weird gather angles that just catches everyone in the cookie jar. Like every time he goes for a Euro step or goes for a pull-up mid-range jumper, he's catching somebody's arm. And people who are facing the Knicks will call it grifting. I call it smart basketball that's going to lead to efficient offense because he's going to make those free throws. So I think he's kind of a matchup issue. The Philly series really encompasses that. Philly didn't have a lot of point of attack options, but they kind of tried a bunch of different archetypes and nothing worked. Like they tried to bother him with length with Kelly Oubre. They tried to bother him with length and IQ with Nicholas Batum. They tried to bother him with speed by putting Tyrese Maxey on him. Kyle Lowry got some reps. Nothing mattered. Jalen Brunson got to his spots every single time. And so to me, Brunson has really strongly the volume argument. We kind of talked about it with, I can't remember, it's already slipping my mind. I guess Wemby would be a good example, but I talked about it with Kevin Durant, who we'll get to soon. Touching the ball a lot and turning it over. Jalen Brunson is the exact inverse of that. You can give this guy 110 touches in a playoff series, and he will average 1.7 turnovers. It's stupid. The ball security is absurd, and that gives his scoring such a nice floor, right? Like, maybe he won't always be hyper efficient because he's taking 30 attempts, but it's going to be like an Allen Iverson type of 35 points per game, like maybe -1, -2% efficiency. You'll live with those misses because you're getting so much creation out of it.
Yep.
I don't think he forces as many adjustments as a lot of other guys, but it's kind of like a double-edged sword because I don't really know if there is an adjustment that I can think of off the top of my head besides just switching. Like, you kind of want to limit Brunson's pick and roll options. So I think a lot of the times teams will just choose to switch, but then he's also a hyper efficient isolationist. So it's like, that's not really a good adjustment. He's also the best in the league at rejecting the screen besides maybe Halliburton. And it's like, what do you do with that? Because he's putting rim pressure on, he's putting pressure on the rim, which with the 5-out spacing provided by Cat has turned him into this randomly hyper efficient scorer. He's at like 62% true shooting this year out of nowhere. So yeah, there's a lot to love with Brunson. To me, the real serious limiting factor is kind of what I touched on a little bit, is I don't view his ceiling in the playoffs as having the same efficiency as these other more physically capable scorers. And what I mean by that is like Brunson at his absolute peak in the playoffs, that Philly series, was still below average efficiency.
Yeah.
It was like -1 or -2%. Over his last 2 playoff runs, he's averaging 30.3 points per game, but on -3% efficiency. And I don't think he's just this inefficient scorer. I'm not saying that. I'm not saying he's a shot chucker. I'm just saying that I think there's a limit to when you're that small and you don't have either a standout athletic trait or you're not this absurd pull-up shooter like Steph Curry. Brunson's an elite shooter, but he's not like 45% pulling 30-footers, that type of shooter.
Yep.
And I think that kind of limits him. I will say, on the efficiency point, turnovers should be counted as a part of efficiency. And I'm sure if someone calculated that and like baked that into efficiency, I'm sure he actually would look more efficient than a lot of these other guys because he doesn't lose any possessions. He just never turns the ball over. That matters a lot. I also think he's a pretty underrated off-ball player. Great catch and shoot guy. Really good at attacking off the catch. To me, it's just like the guys I have ahead of him have physical advantages that I think push them just a little bit higher in terms of like, okay, this guy can go out and give me this like 66% true shooting against a great defense. Whereas Brunson, I feel like, can give me the super, super high volume, but I haven't seen the efficiency in the playoffs just yet. Could change this year because, like I said, he's a completely different player in terms of efficiency. But yeah, that's where my head's at. Where'd you have Brunson, and how do you feel about him?
So I have Jalen Brunson 6. I have Jalen Brunson 6 on my list. One thing that I do think is kind of interesting to keep an eye out on, especially when you talk about Brunson in a playoff setting. If I can freaking find, all right, there we go. And I haven't like rewatched a ton of his playoff film from the past 2 years. Specifically regarding this one thing, he has not been a good 3-point shooter in the playoffs. Just looking at like box score numbers, right?
Yeah.
Now, in Brunson's defense, he's been able to counter that and find other ways, other elite ways to score the ball. I mean, great at drawing fouls and, like you said, creating those different angles to give himself points at the free throw line. Last season, he went from 4.5 rim field goal attempts in the regular season to 6 rim field goal attempts in the playoffs, up the efficiency at the rim. Obviously, a ridiculous mid-range shooter. I just want to see and this could honestly impact the ceiling and the efficiency a little bit with Brunson. I don't think he's a 31% three-point shooter like last season or a 32.5% three-point shooter that he was the year prior in the playoffs. But, like, can we get to that middle ground? Because, bro, since he's been in New York, 41.6% year one, 40% last year in the regular season. He's shooting almost 45% from three this year. Like, is this year we finally get the middle ground where it's, okay, look, you are this really good foul baiter or foul drawer, if you want to call it that. You're elite in the mid-range. Can we finally get that playoffs run where he kind of puts all together and he is maybe not a 45% three-point shooter? He's like a 38% three-point shooter and still getting to the line 8 times a game. And then, like you said, the fact that he's not going to lose possessions, and I think maybe even the 5-out spacing will help with the efficiency and stuff like that, like we've already talked about. I'm a Brunson guy. I think he's one of the guys that plays with some of the best pace in the league, where it like the stop-start kind of herky-jerky type, and that's also how he can create some of those fouls. He's a guy that does benefit from the spacing a little bit, where if you look at some of the other guys we've already talked about, like an Ant, perfect example, where the paint's clogged and Ant's forced to take 11 or whatever threes a game and not able to use his superpower. Brunson can kind of always have his superpower on because of the spacing, because there isn't an abundance of guys that can guard him and not get put into easy foul trouble and things of that nature. So I have Brunson 6. I'm a Brunson guy. I'm curious who your 7 is then, because there's the guy I have at 7. I feel really, really bad about having him at 7. But I'm sure I'll be able to create fun conversation.
So right before I get to 7, I wanted to throw one more point out there about like my player ranking grades, whatever. I kind of viewed Brunson as like the inverse of Steph. With Steph, it's like low volume, more hyper efficiency, higher ceiling, lower floor. And Brunson to me is like the exact opposite. Like, you get the super high volume. The efficiency, I need to see it in the playoffs. We're seeing it right now in the regular season. So if that sustains, I'll have to revisit this discussion. But then like the super high floor, because like you said, he can just kind of get to wherever he needs to go whenever he wants to do it. And that mid-range is unlimited access. He can get to it 15 times a game if he wants to. But then the ceiling is capped because like, if you're a small guard taking 20 mid-range shots, how efficient can you really be over a 7-game series unless you're shooting like Paolo Banchero against the Cavs? So, yeah, I think I could see the argument. I think I could have Brunson as high as 5th. I think I could see him up to the top 5. I think, to me, I don't know how you feel, but I think there's like a clear top 4. Did you?
I have a pretty clear top 4.
Okay, so we'll get to that. So I think Brunson can get up to that 5th spot heading the next tier, but to me, there's like a 4. My number 7 is Devin Booker.
Okay, so he was on my honorable mentions list, but go ahead.
Okay, so did you intentionally skip him because you knew I was going to have him on my list?
Yeah, as soon as I didn't hear him in your like names of people you considered or honorable mentions list, I was like, okay, he has to be on the list somewhere.
So I'm very high on Devin Booker as a scorer. I think I'll start with a couple of limitations. I think one, in terms of everyone in this top 10, he's probably the most athletically limited. And what I mean by that is like, we talked about superpowers, like Anthony Edwards' first step. Booker has nothing like that. I think he's pretty strong. He plays really physical, but that's usually to create separation in the mid-range. It's not really like I'm going to just bully you and get to a layup. It's not that type of game. Not super vertical, so you're not getting a lot of above the rim finishing. But what Booker does have is he has size, for one. He's like 6'6", 6'5", and he's got a really, really high release point. So that alone gives him really, really high access to like those. I mean, It's crazy. I think he probably has maybe the most versatile shot diet in the league in terms of like not ranges, not like rim, mid range three, but just in terms of like the types of shots he is taking.
Yep.
Like you've got post fades over every shoulder, you've got curling off of screens, off ball stuff, you've got pull up threes, you've got pull up twos, you've got like he shoots like 75% at the rim when he does get there. Like I think Booker, in just terms of sheer shot making, is probably the most versatile shot maker in the league right now. And to me, that just like trumps everything else I'm going to talk about with Booker. Like when you look at him, it's like, okay, you have a really high floor. You can get to these mid-range spots with ease. You're going to get to the free throw line. You're going to hit these mid-range shots at a high clip. You're an elite three-point shooter. So it's like, okay, you have a high floor. But then you have this ceiling where it's like the shot making becomes inhuman, and you get the Nuggets and Clippers series and back-to-back, like in the same playoff run, where he's shooting like 70% true shooting on like 35 points per game. What are we doing? Like that is just so absurd, and I don't think that's sustainable. But then we just see it time and time again. Over the last 3 years, his playoff numbers are 29 points per game on plus 8% efficiency. It's stupid. Like, that is absurd. That's literally like Kevin Durant on the Warriors numbers. And
That
again, I don't think
2023 playoff run, like I'm looking at like 33 and a half points, 68% true shoot.
It's stupid. It's stupid. And I think Booker, actually, one thing that I will tax him a little bit for is I think he probably has the worst handle of anyone in this top 10. Actually, no, his teammate. His teammate.
Yeah.
His teammate. And then Wemby for you. But Booker's handle, pretty limited. Ball security, kind of questionable. But I think he makes up that ground by being like a world-class off-ball player.
Yeah.
Like, specifically in that Denver series, the off-the-catch stuff, like, you can't help off of him or he's just torching a closeout every single time. Rotating defense, you can't do it. And one more thing I want to touch on with Booker that I think gets really overlooked and gives him a much higher floor. You might actually want to pull these numbers up as I tell them to you. In the playoffs, including LeBron, including Giannis, including Shea, there has not been a better transition scorer in the playoffs than Devin Booker in like the last 10 years. His transition scoring numbers are freaking absurd. He'll score like 10 points per game on like 1.6 points per possession. And this is a theme in multiple years. And I'm looking at this and I'm like, well, that explains why he doesn't have bad playoff series. Because he gets like 12 easy points.
23 playoff run. So this is what, Clippers and Denver, right?
Yeah.
Jesus Christ.
His transition.
I'm gonna read off his playtime data really quick. 2023 playoffs. Pick and roll ball handler scoring possessions, 1.01 points per possession. 60.8% true shooting on pick and roll scoring possessions. Transition. I want you to guess what his point per possession is in transition.
It's got to be like 1.68.
Okay. A little too high, but it's still stupid. It's 1.5. 1.52.
Yeah, too high. 1.5.
1.5 points per possession in transition, 78.2% true shooting, 1.2 point per possession isolation, 63% true shooting. Spot up possessions, 1.27, 67%.
Like, there's nothing he can't do. I think for all of like the people hate these talks, but like in terms of play type and in terms of shot making variety, he really is the closest thing we've seen to Kobe Bryant. Like that's what that profile is.
I'm sitting here
except while shooting like 40% from three.
I'm over here like contemplating, should I have put Devin Booker over Wembanyama? Oh man, this is fun. This is fun. I think I just like severely slept on Devin Booker.
I'm really high on Booker. I just, as a scorer, I think I'm maybe a little lower on some of the other parts of his game. I actually was really close to having Booker sixth. Like that was my battle with 6-7 with Booker and my next guy.
Damn.
So, who was your 7?
My 7 is Jason Tatum, and
that was my 6. That's the guy I was battling.
And for me, I think Tatum, if specifically this year, has an argument for even being like 5th here. Like, that's how good he's been this season, where he is. Okay, let's backtrack really quick and talk about one of the things that probably knocks him down a little bit compared to the other guys. And it's purely situation. He is clearly in the best situation amongst any player that we're going to discuss today. Clearly.
Yeah.
The only other guy that maybe is there, and even then I think Tatum is comfortably in a better spot, is Shea.
Yeah.
But again, Tatum's comfortably in a better situation where if you try to, limit Shea's scoring and say other guys, like the other guys I think we've seen in a playoff series, and if you look at the Bucks game, for example, where teams just say, hey, look, we're going to, other guys make shots, and if they do, okay, then we'll overreact, and then Shea just, gets to be Shea all the time. In Boston, if you say, all right, cool, other guys make shots, they're going to make shots. It's Derek White, JB, Kristaps, Al Horford, Sam Hauser, who doesn't miss, Payton Pritchard, who literally doesn't miss. So that's number one. He's clearly in the best situation out of any guy here. But Tatum is, this season in particular, he is a stupid isolation scorer.
Yeah.
Ridiculous isolation scorer. 97. He's one of the highest frequency of isolation users in the league. It's consistently a great shot. He doesn't turn the ball over in isolation attempts either, which is really, really important. And maybe I'm just been sleeping on Tatum in the past, but I feel like he's been a considerably better mismatch hunter this season in terms of using his body, getting to the rim against those mismatches, or just attacking the mid-range game. Where I think it was the Cavs game I was watching a little bit of film of earlier and yesterday, where it was 4 straight times where he attacked the switch and just hit a 15-foot pull-up jumper. And it was just net every single time. There's some stuff about the shot diet, obviously, and how the Celtics, overcorrected his shot diet from, all right, look, we're going to shoot 20-foot pull-up jumpers 12 times a game to now it's not nearly as much. We've kind of talked about how we didn't want, Brandon Miller, for example, to do the Jason Tatum.
Yeah.
But I think Tatum is ever so slowly starting to refine, a solid balance. And I think, too, what Tatum has, an advantage over, we've talked about this as well in terms the Tatum and Brown discussion. Tatum is a significantly better decision-maker. He is this team's best decision-maker on ball. You combine that with the shot making, the different ways he could do it in terms of he's also a really efficient transition scorer, 1.2 points per possession in transition this season, good out of the pick and roll, elite in isolation. And we've seen, if I can pull it up really, really fast, last season the playoffs wasn't the most efficient playoff run from Tatum, but that's because the pull up the three specifically just wasn't there for Tatum last playoff run. But I think we've seen enough from Tatum from a playoff, standpoint to say that he is a good enough playoff performer. He's been insane this season scoring the ball. So I have Tatum. What number are we at? 7. I have Tatum 7th for me.
Yeah, so I had him 6th, and I pretty much don't have anything positive to add to your point. You kind of hit it all. Elite isolation scorer, elite off-ball player. I think goes overlooked. He not only is he the best decision maker, he's also the best at playing off of the advantage on that team.
Yeah.
In terms of burning closeouts, getting to the rim, or just hitting flyby threes, the spot up shooting. Tatum's an elite off ball player, and that balance alone, isolation and off ball, gives you just so many options that you can do with him offensively. I think what makes it tough for me is, because I have to be the downer now, because I have to talk about why he's not in my top 4. Actually, I'm going to start with some numbers. I'll throw the numbers at you. This season, 29 points per game on plus 3% efficiency. That's freaking good, man. It's freaking good. EPM even has him at plus 4% efficiency, so they actually expect him to improve a little bit. But in the playoffs, last 3 years, 26 points per game on negative 1% efficiency. And that's a really, really big sample size. So we're talking about a ton of playoff games, and he's this negative 1% efficiency. I have 2 points I want to make on that. 1 point is, I do think he's improved. You said that. I think we're talking about a guy who 3 years ago maybe was this negative 1, negative 2% efficiency guy. Now he's taking more threes. I would say he's improved as a decision maker. Like you said, the shot diet's balancing out better. So I do think he's a little bit better now. This is his best season. But my other big argument with it would be, he maybe has the biggest disparity between ceiling and floor of any guy we've talked about. Like the volatility is just
Fair.
all over the place, and I think it's because of how much he relies on that pull-up three. And it's like, look at the Dallas series, for example. Scoring was basically non-existent. We could talk about the ins and outs of that series and whether or not he was impactful, because like his playmaking and defense were just dialed all the way up.
Yeah.
Just amazing performance. But the scoring percentages specifically were just a disaster. Like the guy couldn't throw a rock into the ocean. And I think that's just like a product of his play style. Like I think it's like he kind of relies on the spacing to get to the rim as much as he does. So when teams do clog, yeah, he's going to make the right decision. He's going to kick it out. He's going to make the right decision. And that means a lot for him as an overall player. But when we're specifically talking about scoring, I do think teams can kind of sit in his driving lanes, force him to like really settle for those pull-up threes. And then it's like, okay, which Tatum are we going to get? Are we going to get finals against the Mavs Tatum? Or are we going to get 51-point Game 7 superhuman Jason Tatum? I don't really know. But to me, that's the one thing that holds him back, because I would say my top 4 and really my top 5 of guys coming up, I would say like have just significantly higher floors than Tatum.
Yeah.
And Tatum at his ceiling, maybe the best in the league. Like when Tatum's pull-up three is falling, the guy is just terrorizing, because he's like he's 6'8". He's pretty strong. He's very athletically gifted. He's got the handle. He can play on or off the ball. When that three is falling, there's literally nothing you can do with him. And I think that to me is what pushes him above some of these other guys. Like I think Tatum versus Brunson, the argument to me just comes down to the fact that Tatum's ceiling has just been so much higher.
Yeah,
and it's the
fair.
ceiling versus floor thing. Like you have Brunson 6, Tatum 7. I have Tatum 6, Brunson 8. And to me, it's just a ceiling versus floor thing. It's like Brunson's going to give you that higher floor, but Tatum's highs are so high that I just can kind of, when he's got it going, you can kind of put him up against any scorer in the league, and he can maybe even outperform them.
Yeah.
So to me, Tatum, the lack of floor holds him back from top 4 or 5, but the ceiling keeps him at number 6 for me. So let's actually just recap our 10 through 6 before we move on. I had Anthony Edwards 10.
Yep.
Steph Curry 9, Jalen Brunson 8, Devin Booker 7, and Jason Tatum 6.
My 10 through 6 is Victor Wembanyama at 10, Damian Lillard at 9, Donovan Mitchell at 8, Jason Tatum at 7, and Jalen Brunson at 6.
All right, and I think we're going to have the same number 5. You can go ahead and call it out.
All right, number 5 for me is Kevin Durant.
Yeah, it's such an easy argument. So go, yeah,
argument.
You make the argument.
The best, I don't want to phrase this. Probably the most versatile scorer in the entire league. I think that's fair to say. In terms of on ball, off ball, you can pair him with any star in the league, and he's going to be perfectly fine. I think we've seen him succeed in the Warriors system, obviously, with their motion heavy stuff. We've seen him in Phoenix now with, Booker and, CP last year, Bradley Beal, like the scalability and how easy he can make it to be. And then also, he's one of the more reliable isolation scorers in the league. Honestly, the only real critiques you can have of KD is, one, the handle, which we already talked about. I think a second critique you can have of KD is, I'm not quite sure, and this is purely age and health. I don't know if in a playoff setting consistently, like let's say the shot isn't falling, and this is a very nitpicky argument that you can have for anybody. I'm not sure if the shot isn't falling, can KD consistently create easy shots for himself, like at the rim, for an example, where like shot isn't falling for Anthony Edwards, for example. All right, cool. We'll just find a way to get a clear side and let him use the superpower, which is his first step, for an example, right? And he doesn't have like the playmaking gravity that maybe like 1 through 4 has that can help boost him in that category. But this is honestly like a tier of itself. Like I think KD's in a tier by himself where I feel like he's comfortably better than or I would prefer him as a scorer over 6 through 10, but he's not 1 through 4. Like that's kind of how I feel about KD.
Yeah, I think the KD argument's been made for 12 years now. I think he's just slowly regressed from what he was at his prime. Again, using the same thing I did for Steph Curry. When you look at OKC or even Golden State KD's regular season numbers, we're talking about 25 to 30 points per game on like +9 to +11% efficiency. Just this
Right.
stupid like 30 +10 guy. This season, he's kind of actually having an up year as a scorer over the last few, but that's still 27 points on +6.5%. So instead of that like +9, +10, it's a +6.5, and that's basically just the league catching up. Like his shot diet in 2014 could be the exact same that it is now, and it's just like the league is more efficient now, and it's the reality of the situation. And I don't think Kevin Durant has regressed a ton. I would say the biggest difference is, like you said, the rim pressure. I would say he used to be a lot more explosive, definitely a better vertical finisher. That's kind of a limitation at this point, and that brings me to last year's Minnesota playoff series, because if you remember, their scheme was, hey, we're going to put Karl Anthony Towns on Kevin Durant, we're going to switch everything, and we're just going to play him in single coverage. And Kevin Durant scored like 30-something points per game, or he had like a really good scoring series, but because he couldn't create those easy shots for himself, the defense never reacted. And basically it just turned into like this weird empty stats looking series where it's like, yeah, Kevin Durant scored a lot of points very efficiently, but the team's offense sucked. And it was like because they could just prevent Kevin Durant from creating any advantages. And I do think that is a limiting factor over, like you said, the next four guys. But over the other guys we talked about, Kevin Durant's floor is stupid. Like, a down series for Kevin Durant.
Does he have the best floor of like any? Okay, follow me here. Does Kevin Durant have the best floor of any all-time scorer in NBA history? I think the answer is probably
At his peak?
At his peak, yeah.
I would say second. I would say that's Michael Jordan.
Oh, yeah.
Just because Michael Jordan is like, yeah, Michael Jordan's just like, hey, Michael Jordan's just like, hey, I'm going to give you like 40 points per game efficiently, and there's nothing you can do because I'm just going to blow by my man every single play.
Yeah.
And it's like, and it's a legal defense. Yeah,
Yeah.
I would say I see your point, though, because, yes, Kevin Durant at his peak is just like, there's nothing you can really do. Like I said, a down series for Kevin Durant is an up series for like almost everyone in NBA history. Like, I would say these last 3 years have damaged Kevin Durant's playoff reputation, right? Like, you got the 2022 first round out against Boston.
Yeah.
You've got the 2023 second round out against Denver. 2024 first round out to Minnesota. Over those 3 runs, Kevin Durant's averaging 28 points per game on +3% efficiency. So it's like, yeah, he's still this really efficient 28 point per game scorer. It just maybe isn't what it was in Golden State or OKC, which is like a top 3 scorer ever. So yeah, Kevin Durant's regressed to the point where, like, yeah, now he's a normal top 5 scorer in on the planet, but maybe not like top 5 scorer of all time.
Yeah.
So yeah, I think it's an easy argument. The floor is super high. The ceiling's really high because he's an absurd shooter, 3-point shooter. Gets to the line
What
a
he
lot.
does in the clutch is insane.
Yeah, dude, the clutch scoring is ridiculous. I'm glad you mentioned that. So yeah, I think Kevin Durant, firm 5 for me, actually. Like, I hinted at it with Brunson. I was like, I could see him as high as 5, but now I'm kind of thinking about it again, and I'm like, nah, I think Kevin Durant's a pretty firm 5. Yeah.
I think the argument, even though, KD's 5. KD's 5.
KD's my 5. Yeah, I also want to throw out the scalability. Like, dude,
touched on
dude
that.
can fit in any system. Okay, so we've got 4 guys left, and I'm pretty sure we have or did I say 5 guys? Four
We have
guys?
4 guys left. 4 guys left.
We have 4 guys left, and it's obviously the same 4. I feel like we're going to have them in wildly different lists, though. My thing is, I want to get this out there. I think all 4 have a claim for number 1. I want to say that.
I agree.
And
Same
I
tier
think,
for me.
Yeah, and I think if you order them any order, 1, 2, 3, 4, 4, 2, 3, 1, 1, 4, 2, 3, whatever.
Yeah.
I won't argue. Like, this is a firm top tier, best scorers on the planet to me. And it's just like, you have to get really nitpicky. Like, these arguments are going to sound sick. If you're still listening to this, we're about to make some sick arguments against these players. And we're going to sound like haters. But we have to get nitpicky. So I'm going to put you on the hot seat. Who's your number 4?
My number 4, and this feels gross because I've normally come to his defense, I think, more than most people have, especially this season. Number 4 for me is Luka. I have Luka 4.
That's also my number 4.
Okay.
Is Luka Doncic.
If we are going pure ceiling, like hold on, look at my list. It's like Steph, Jokic, who we'll get to, obviously. My point is, Luka has a legit claim for the highest ceiling out of any player on this list.
Yeah, can I throw out there on my grade scale? Luka won volume and ceiling categories.
It's like,
10 out of
okay,
10.
there we go.
10 out of
So
10. Yeah.
I think you have him outright. I think there's maybe an argument for like another guy here, but still, like the point is, ceiling wise, the shot is falling, and then you combine with the playmaking gravity as well. Like the shot's falling, the ceiling. Luka Doncic probably has the best ceiling of any offensive player in the league currently.
Yeah, agreed.
It's just tough. I think scalability kind of hurts him compared to these other guys. That's probably the biggest like drawback to Luka is the scalability compared to the other three guys here. What would be other kind of like turning arguments for against Luka?
Well, I think it's kind of what I hinted at with Brunson. I think I think his ceiling is on a completely different planet from Brunson, and that's why we're talking about argument for number one scorer on the planet. Mm-hmm. But my thing is, last playoff run, I don't know how much to index on that knee injury because there were a lot of really, really low moments as a scorer, and then there were a lot of really, really high moments. Like you have like the OKC series where he's really struggling as a scorer. Mm-hmm. Then you have the Minnesota series where he gets that favorable matchup with McDaniels who can't bother him with size. And then it's just like, oh, Luka, efficient 32 again and again and again. And it's like, oh, yeah, you can't do. And then it's like, oh, you do this. Now it's a skip pass. You do this. Now it's a mid-range jumper. Completely left the number one defense clueless. I think that matters. Like the guys, just harping on your point again, the ceiling. It's just absurd. But I think the efficiency in the playoffs has been so up and down that I'm a little bit less confident in him sustaining this like hyper efficient production over an entire run. So I guess my argument would be he probably has a lower floor. Actually, I would say pretty comfortably of the four guys we have left, by far the lowest floor as a scorer. Would you agree with that?
Yeah, because I think
go ahead. I think it's because of the four, two arguments. One, I would say he at this point kind of sounds weird to say, but I'd say out of these four, he's probably the worst at getting to the rim.
Yeah,
which
pretty
feels
comfortably.
weird because a few years ago, like Luka was getting to the rim easily.
Yeah,
I would say he's actually gotten worse as a driver.
He's easily the most jump shot reliant, which sounds crazy considering you have like Shea we're gonna get to in a second. Yeah. But in terms of methods of scoring, Luka is easily the most jump shot reliant out of any of these four guys.
And it's like the pull-up three. If it's not falling, now you have a much lower floor in terms of efficiency. The volume's always going to be there. That's why I gave him a 10 out of 10. He can create his own shot better than anyone in the league. I also gave him a 10 out of 10 for versatility, and that kind of sounds weird. Like you kind of hinted at it, like Kevin Durant maybe is the most versatile scorer when you consider on and off ball. But when I was thinking about that, I was like, Luka, ball in his hands, will create every single shot in the book. Like, it doesn't matter if it's a post-up, isolation, pick and roll, pull-up three,
spot
mid-range.
Up, even, like, playing off of Kyrie a little bit.
There's not a shot he can't get to, and I think that matters a lot. But to your point, he is more reliant on the shot-making than some of these other guys, and I wouldn't say he's a Kevin Durant-level shooter, because, like, 5 players in NBA history are.
Yeah.
So, yeah, I agree with your point. And I think the playoff numbers kind of reflect that. Over the last 3 playoffs, 30 points per game. So the volume, 30 points per game is absurd. Plus 1% efficiency. And again, that was like +3, +4 before this last playoff run.
Yeah.
So how much of that is knee injury? How much of it is like just him maybe regressing as a slasher? I don't really know. And that's why it's tough. Funny enough, I actually had Luka at 2 up until like earlier this afternoon. I like rethought about it in my head and I was like, I'm gonna drop him down to 4. So that just shows how close these guys are to me. So yeah, Luka to me, number 4, but it's just so tough. I think ceiling wise, he's number 1. Versatility wise, he's number 1. Volume wise, he's number 1. But these other 3 guys, I think they're more reliably efficient and I think they have higher floors.
Yeah.
And I would actually argue, before we move on real quick, on the ceiling and floor point, in like my 6 through 10, I kind of valued ceiling more. Like that's why I had Tatum over Brunson. Mm-hmm. But with the top 4, all of their ceilings are so high that I actually think the floor becomes more important.
Yeah, that's fair. That's definitely fair. Who's your number 3?
My number 3 is Shai Gilgeous-Alexander.
Okay.
So the Shai argument to me is pretty easy. I talked about it with Brunson. The ability to touch the ball 100 times and never turn it over.
Yeah.
Shea has that. The handle, the ball security, absurd. One thing that's kind of tough for me is the experiment with the pull-up three. I don't know how that's going to look in the playoffs. It looked really rough against the Bucks. He was chucking.
Yeah.
It was not pretty. And it was like not good process behind those pull-up threes. He was just launching them. And I think like then you can run into a weird Luka issue where it's like, okay, I just talked about Luka being reliant on the pull-up three. What if Shea gets into a series where they shrink the floor and he's kind of just chucking pull-up threes? I don't think he's as good of a three-point shooter as Luka. So then it's a very tough conversation we have to have about those two.
Yeah.
But I think Shea, ridiculously high floor. Look no further than the Dallas series. They took away everything. They sat in the gaps. They left shooters open. And just time and time again, mid-range bucket, mid-range bucket, mid-range bucket. Like just surgical mid-range scoring, shot making. He's a freak athlete in terms of like all of the like soft traits.
Yeah.
Like coordination, balance,
Body control.
Yep. Yeah, lower body strength, flexibility. The guy is just kind of a freak. And so I think you have like the Brunson argument, right? Like the high floor, high volume, not going to turn the ball over. But then you also have like, he's really efficient because he's an elite finisher at the rim and gets there a lot. He gets to the line a ton, makes like 90% of those, like a 50% mid-range shooter. So yeah, for me with Shea, I think he has a slight scalability edge over Luka. It's pretty slight because they're both pretty ball dominant. And I don't think Shea is like a great spot up shooter or anything. So I would say very slight edge there. I would say Luka has the edge in ceiling and volume. I would say Shea probably forces more adjustments just as a scorer. I would say Luka forces more adjustments overall because of the playmaking. But I think just as a scorer, you have to do more against Shea. Like, for example, I don't think Boston's defensive strategy would have worked against Shea because he's just going to beat his man off the dribble so much. Like the strategy of like switch everything, play one-on-one. I just think Shea's too good at driving. So that's a little bit tough for me. But then the big argument for me is, like I just said, I value floor a little bit more. So Shea just has a little bit higher of a floor to me. And it's because he's a little bit less reliant on the pull-up three. But if he continues to kind of just chuck those when it gets tough, then we'll revisit because then I would think Luka's just a comfortably better scorer.
So for me, do you want me to tell you where I have Shea? Or do you want me to just say who I have, three?
I think I know where you have Shea, but go ahead. You just creative freedom. I don't want to go where the heart tells you to go.
All right. I have Giannis third. I have Giannis third. And honestly, I don't even have a great argument for why I have Shea over Giannis. It's kind of back and forth. I kind of went back and forth with these two all day. My 1 and 4 were pretty much set in stone for me. Like from the minute we said we were going to do this, and I started like compiling my list, I was like, okay, I know my 1 is. Out of the other 3 guys, I think I know who I have 4, and that was Luke, obviously. The thing with Giannis is one, and this is even, I don't even know if you can say this is a knock, but it's something that is interesting that you have to account for, although I'm not concerned. We haven't seen a playoff run from Giannis in 3 years.
Yes.
And that is completely due to health. It's not anything else really. I'm not saying that I expect them to have a bad playoff series again this season, assuming Milwaukee. I mean, they've kind of ridden the ship and look like they're going to make the playoffs, but not saying I'm worried about it. But I think that is kind of fair to say where you've seen Shea in a playoff series where he forced the other team to make an adjustment, and kind of like you said, like Dallas took away everything from OKC and said, Shea, look, do this and be just elite and hyper efficient. And Shea said, okay, to your point, like, okay, mid-range bucket, mid-range bucket, mid-range bucket. Mm-hmm. Like, Shea single-handedly, for the most part, yeah, I'm going to go there, single-handedly made that a series against Dallas where nobody else could do anything with the ball in their hands. Like, that was kind of the series that made people go, J-Dub, all right, we're kind of a ways away still. Chet needs to take another leap. But, like, game 3, game 6, like, where Shea was just 36 points on 56% shooting. I have the true shooting up or whatever, but hyper-efficient performances from Shea in that playoff run. Shea was 58% true shooting overall for the entire playoffs. Shot 49% from the mid-range on 12 attempts, which is absurd.
Absurd.
The shot diet's kind of balanced out in a good and a bad way. It gives them it opens up the mid-range arguably a little bit more. But to your point, in a playoff setting where you kind of get like another Dallas situation where, look, we're going to take everything away from you, I do agree that I hope it doesn't resort to him just chucking threes. So I do think that's a fair point. Giannis, I think the scalability thing with Giannis, I don't know, and this is like to my point earlier about Dame. I think the Dame and Giannis thing is kind of equally on both of them, where I do wonder how well Giannis can truly play next to a ball-dominant like point guard, kind of like Dame is, and have great chemistry with them. Where it's part of the reason why I said I think Steph and Giannis would be a astronomically better fit, because Steph's superpower doesn't necessarily involve him bringing the ball down 75 times a game.
Yeah.
Again, really, really nitpicky. Really, you can maybe even say the real reason I have Shea above Giannis here is because we've just seen Shea in a playoff setting, more recent. Because there really isn't a good argument for either one of these guys, in my opinion. Giannis adding the 18-foot mid-range jumper and being like legit elite at it this season has made him just stupid. And to go on to finish the Giannis point, he also just has a stupid floor. Like,
yes,
these top three guys all have just elite of elite floors. And it's tough. Again, you're really, really picking hairs between like all three of these guys.
So before I get into the Giannis sermon, I want to throw a couple more numbers at you. So I started this with Luka Doncic, right? Number 4. 3-year playoffs, 30 points per game, plus 1% efficiency. And by the way, for anyone listening, I didn't explain this. When I say plus 1%, that means the opponents that he played allowed a true shooting percentage, and then he had a true shooting percentage 1% ahead of that. For example, if I face the Heat in a playoff series who allow a 57% true shooting on the season, and then I have a 58%, I'm plus 1.
Yep.
Right? That's how I look at that. So Luka, 30 points per game, plus 1 over the last 3 years. Shea, we only have the 2 playoff series, and it was 30.2 points per game, negative 0.5% efficiency. So we're talking like a 1% efficiency difference and like 0.2 points per game. The playoff production has been damn near identical, and sample sizes can influence that, whatever. Giannis, we only have the first round of 2023 for like 4 games, and then the 2 rounds of 2022, 30 points per game, negative 1% efficiency. So we're talking about 3 guys who like have damn near the exact same playoff production over the last 3 years. The one argument I'll make for Giannis is that I think he's on another level as a scorer right now from what he's ever been. I think he's just at a completely different level right now.
That's fair.
So when you look at 3 guys who have this similar of playoff production, I think I kind of have to give some leeway to Giannis and say, hey, I expect that to get a little bit better. Because I think not only the mid-range thing, I think he's improved so much as a decision maker and as an off-ball player that he's gotten himself more easy shots than ever. Like in terms of just like at the rim and things like that. So I do think Giannis gets a little bit of an edge there. My other argument would be Giannis forces more adjustments than any player since prime Steph. And before that, prime Shaq. Like Giannis, the type of things defenses have to do against Giannis is frankly stupid. Like it started with Toronto, right? Kawhi at the point of attack, box up the elbow and the block. And it's like, what? Do not let this guy touch the paint. And then it's like, yeah, maybe it kind of worked, but Giannis still got to the rim like 10 times a game. And then it's like we see it again in 2020. We see it in 2021 against Brooklyn, and he just like something changed in that Brooklyn series. Like midway through, he was like, "Hey, I can just run through these guys every single time. They can't do anything. Blake Griffin's the rim protector." And then he just like forced his way. And then the Phoenix series, don't even get me started on that. 35 points per game on 60% shooting. Talk about a ceiling. My goodness. 2022 against Boston, I would say it was like the floor. And it's like, yeah, his percentages in that series were not good. They weren't good. But he was still scoring like 34 points per game because he's just like, you can't do anything with a physical force like that. He's 6'11". He's one of the fastest players on the planet. He's ridiculously strong. He's got an elite change of direction. He can handle the ball. Like, what can you do with that? And people will harp on the versatility point so much because it's like, These other guys can hit the pull-up three. They can turn into mid-range jumpers at a higher clip. They have better handles. But, like, Giannis's superpower is the most valuable superpower of any scorer in the league. Is that even a hot take? Like, Giannis at the rim is the best weapon of any player in the league?
I would argue, like, Jokic post-ups.
Okay, so we'll talk about that. But, like, those are the two to me. And actually, that stems into my argument. That's why they're my 1 and 2. Giannis was my 2. Ultimately, kind of like what kind of broke my tie, I kind of just went off of like, because like I said, all these 3 guys were so close to me, I kind of just over-indexed a little bit on the current regular season production. Luka, kind of a slower start, 29 points per game, plus 1% efficiency. So it's like, yeah, Luka's having a slower start. He's obviously going to get back. We've talked about this multiple times. He's going to get back to his level. But like, because of that, I kind of knock him from these other 2 guys who are early MVP candidates. Giannis this season, 33 points per game, plus 6% efficiency. Just absurd. And then Shea, 30 points per game, plus 4.5% efficiency. So to me, when I'm splitting hairs like this and I'm talking about like things that set me over the edge, I think floor, adjustments, and current production. And to me, Giannis has those 3 over the other 2 guys. And that to me just puts him at number 2. It's not a confident number 2, but I do feel a little bit better about it than I do about the Shea versus Luka thing. Like, I think Shea and Luka are closer at 3-4 for me than Giannis is at 2.
Yeah, that's fair. And then number 1 is Jokic.
It is.
That was pretty easy for me. I'm not gonna lie. I didn't really have a back and forth.
The only player I would go back and forth with is a healthy Joel Embiid. And that doesn't exist.
Yeah.
So Jokic is my number 1.
Jokic is one.
We kind of said all these guys have an argument for number 1. But like when you look across the board at all of these things, it's like everything kind of points you back to Jokic. It's like, okay, let's look at volume. Oh, Jokic is there. His playoff volume over the last 3 years, 30 points per game. Like, that's right in line with what I said Shea, Giannis, and Luka have done. Mm-hmm. So you've got the argument with Jokic. He can create his own shot. I would even say he can physically impose himself on a defense in a way that only like 5 players in NBA history can do through his post-ups. Mm-hmm. And I'm sure you want to go into that in a sec about his post-ups being just this absurd weapon. Efficiency. I'm just going to go down my checklist, right? Efficiency was my next part of my category. He's the most efficient volume scorer since peak Steph.
Yep.
In the playoffs, like I said, 30 points per game. Remember, all those guys were around like -1, +1,
He's
neutral
like
efficiency.
+5.
+6.
Yeah.
The 30 on +6. Like, that is just stupid. In the regular season, what has he been? +7.8 on 31 points per game this season? Like, come on, bro. Come on. Ceiling. Absurdly high. Look at the Phoenix series. Just absurd. He had a 51 point or 53.11 assist game. Like, come on. Floor. I would say he has the highest floor of any scorer in the league. And it's because of the fact, we're going to talk about it with the post-ups, he has unlimited access to super high efficient shots, and there's nothing a defense can do to take them away.
Yeah.
And it's like, even in that Minnesota series, who many will say that was like the hallmark of what a down series looks like for Jokic, right? Like, they had the perfect defensive game plan for him. They made him uncomfortable. They made him shoot a lot of threes. Jokic came out of that series averaging 29 points per game on 60% true shooting. Come on, bro. Like, what are we doing? Then you get to some of the other categories. Versatility. Jokic has that.
Like, after Luka, like, in terms of versatility of, like, creating any shot, like, he's...
Yeah. Sambor shuffle.
Yeah.
Adjustments. Well, you better adjust to Jokic or he's going to give you that 50-point game like he did against Phoenix.
Yeah.
Scalability. The guy's an absurd off-ball player as a screen and roll partner, as a cutter, as an offensive rebounder. All of those things translate to pretty much any team with any collection of ball handlers, floor spacers, whatever. They have no spacing right now. They're the worst three-point shooting team in the league, and he's scoring 31 on +8, like I said. So, yeah, I think it's a pretty easy argument to make. Like, all of these guys have their superpowers. Like I said, Giannis at the rim. Giannis's just physical like the ability to physically overwhelm someone.
Yeah.
Luka has the volume, the shot creation, the versatility, the 3 levels. But when you just look at each category, Jokic just checks off every box in a way that nobody else does. So when we're looking at the top 4 who all have an argument for number 1, I just think he has a significantly stronger argument than anyone else.
So, for me, I mean, it's pretty. Again, this is why it was so easy for me. Jokic has single-handedly probably the best method of good offense out of any player. Again, I don't even know if like peak Steph is there. It's probably like peak Shaq. Like Jokic post-ups is the best method of offense, like of any player, like individual play type. Again, since like peak Shaq, because of, and this is where like gravity comes into the conversation again. Like if you overcompensate for the scoring and say, all right, well, we can't double him in the post because we can't let him go single coverage in the post because that's a guaranteed bucket or foul because he's a really good foul drawer as well, or just opportunity for Denver to score and generate a really, really quality shot. So you overcompensate. Oh, he's like the best post up passer of the past like 20 years or so. You can go maybe even a little bit further back. Probably.
Hang on. I was gonna say ever.
yeah. And then you go and you get like a playoff run like you did the title year, or how he started off this year, where now you combine that with absurd 3-point shooting, where that title run from three, Jokic that title run he shot 46% from three in that playoff run. So far this season, Jokic is shooting 50%? He's shooting 50% from three to start off the year. Yep. Like, nobody generates a better shot in the league for their individual offense better than Jokic does. And you combine that with the floor. You combine that with also in his own right, again, a stupid ceiling. The gravity, it's all there. Again, like you say, you just eventually, bring yourself to coming back to Jokic, where, again, he can have that ultra bad 3-point shooting playoff series, and it doesn't phase him from an efficiency standpoint, like you already mentioned. He's the best scorer in the league. He's the best player in the league. It's not like too complicated in my opinion. And Sean, you're just glazing Jokic.
The thing for me is, like I said, floor matters most for me in this conversation of the very, very best scorer. And Jokic has just this one aspect of his scoring game that makes his floor so high. And it is the fact that whether it's a floater, a runner, a hook, his touch and his size.
His touch is stupid.
His touch, yeah. So you got a 7-foot, 280-pounder who has the best touch in the league, maybe the best touch we've ever seen. And so what that means is, while these other guys, like I talked about Giannis, when he gets to the rim, he's got like an 80% shot. And he's going to get to the rim a lot. He's going to get a lot of 80% shots. Shea, probably like 70-something% at the rim. Same thing with Luka, high 70s at the rim. Also has like a 38% pull-up three. So you've got these hyper-efficient shots. But the thing with Jokic is, if he's within 10 feet of the basket, that is like a 65% shot. So no matter what the back line is doing, no matter how he's being pressed up on, he can turn and shoot over his man at like a 60% clip. And that alone just gives him just a stupid floor. Like I said, Minnesota, they had Cat pushing him out. They had the best roamer in the league coming over from the weak side and basically just like doubling early. And he just turned into touch shots over and over again. Ended the series with 60% true shooting in what many will end up probably considering his worst series. And what's funny is the other one that's considered maybe his worst series is the Golden State series. He averaged, 31 points per game on 65% true shooting in that series or something like that. In the last 3 games of that series, he averaged 35 points on 70% true shooting.
Another series where like the 3-ball wasn't really dropping, by the way.
At all. He was like 27% or something that. Yeah, so yeah, to me it's like I don't want to over-index on the numbers because then it just turns into like, well, we could just punch this into a spreadsheet and we'll end up with our top 10 scorers, like ask ChatGPT. But like at a certain point, the numbers matter. Jokic is consistently posting these absurdly efficient scoring totals that nobody else in the league can match, and nobody has matched since like Cleveland LeBron, peak Steph, Pete KD, and please come back 2021 Kawhi. That's pretty much it. So, yeah. Do you have any last thoughts? I think we should just rattle off our top 10s and get out of here because this is running on interstellar runtime at this point.
And I mean, crazy of me, by the way, to say, yeah, let's have other topics on top of this too. Good grief. Avengers Endgame runtime. 1 through 10, for me, Jokic, Shea, Giannis, Luka, pretty clear tier 1 for me. 5th, Kevin Durant. 6, Jalen Brunson. 7, Jason Tatum. 8, Donovan Mitchell. Wait, did I mess that up? Okay. 8, Donovan Mitchell. 9, Damian Lillard. 10, Victor Wembanyama. Although Tyler made me feel like a real idiot for not having Book there at 10.
So
I'm sorry.
Mine is 1 Jokic, 2 Giannis, 3 Shea, 4 Luka, 5 KD, 6 Jason Tatum, 7 Devin Booker, 8 Jalen Brunson, 9 Steph Curry, and 10 Anthony Edwards. Shout out to my 2 honorable mentions, Donovan Mitchell and Dame, who you had on your list. That's pretty much gonna wrap it up. I hope so. If you somehow listen to this thing, man, we really appreciate you, man. Make sure you drop a like, subscribe wherever you're listening. I don't know how it works on Spotify. Leave a 5-star rating, I think, is what the people do over there. Drop a follow. If you're on YouTube, like I said, like, subscribe, drop some comments on. We want to hear your top 10 lists too, because I think it's just such a fun exercise to go back and forth and really figure out the theoretical side of what translates to the playoffs, what leads to the best scoring, what is the most valuable form of scoring, things of that nature. So yeah, do all that. Make sure you follow us on social medias. Mine is at Tyler Britton _ on Twitter, Instagram, TikTok. Him on Twitter is at Sean _DAVI. Make sure you subscribe to both of our YouTube channels. Mine is Hoop Venue. His is the Sports Headline Show that will upload in 2026.
2028 at this rate.
2028. We will catch you guys in episode number 18, I think. I got that right. Episode number 18. We'll catch you guys next time. Thanks again for listening. See you later.